The Alpha King saw his rejected mate walk in on another Alpha's arm. His wolf snapped in front of everyone. The great hall of Moonbane blazed with 1,000 candles, and 300 wolves fell silent as the herald announced the two people descending the staircase. Alpha Dorian Rourke of Ashfell, and his Luna, Adaline. Every head in the room turned. Whispers spread like fire through dry grass. And at the center of it all, surrounded by allies and admirers, the Alpha King of the Northern Reach went very still. Because the woman on his enemy's arm, poised, unbroken, wearing a moonstone circlet and a gown of deep silver, was the same woman he had thrown to her knees 3 months ago, in front of the entire pack, and called a mistake of fate. He could not stop staring. His companion touched his sleeve, asked what was wrong. He didn't hear her. His chest was heaving. His eyes had begun to burn gold. And then, in front of 300 witnesses and every ruling wolf in 5 territories, the great Alpha King's control shattered. His wolf tore its way to the surface with a snarl that stopped the music, and a single word thundered through the hall. Mine. Before we go back and I show you how she got there, how a woman left for dead on cold stone steps came to bring the most powerful king in the land to his knees, tell me in the comments, which country are you watching from tonight? I truly love knowing where in the world you are. Because this is a story about being thrown away by someone who could not see your worth, and rising anyway, with your head held high. 3 months earlier. The rain had stopped an hour before, but Adaline still could not feel her fingers. She sat on the cold stone steps outside the great hall of the Northern Reach, her ceremonial gown soaked through, the silver embroidery meant to honor her mating clinging to her skin like a shroud. Inside, she could hear music. Laughter. The celebration was continuing without her. What had been meant as her mating ceremony had, in the space of a few sentences, become the party where the Alpha King freed himself of her. I, Varek Ironfang, Alpha King of the Northern Reach, reject you, Adaline, as my fated mate. The words still echoed in her skull. She remembered his face when he said them, not angry, not cruel, simply decided, like a man striking an inconvenient line from a contract. 23 days before, she had felt the bond snap into place the moment their eyes met across that same hall. He had been mid-sentence, addressing his counsel, when his wolf surged forward, gold blazing through his human eyes. Mate, the word had thundered through her blood and bone and soul. For 3 weeks she had believed she was the luckiest wolf alive, she, the daughter of a disgraced minor line, raised by a widowed mother who had mended robes and scrubbed floors in the servants' quarters. She had been a shadow. A nobody. And then the Alpha King had looked at her, and she had become everything. Until tonight. You're a liability, he had told her, his voice carrying across the packed hall where 300 wolves had gathered to witness their union. My enemies will use you against me. Your blood is weak, your loyalties are questionable, and I cannot afford sentiment while I am building an empire. The bond was a mistake of fate. I am correcting it. She had stood there in her silver gown while her fated mate listed the reasons she wasn't worth keeping. And then she had felt it, that golden thread between their souls stretch, strain, and snap. Wolves gasped. A few looked away. A few smiled. Adaline had fallen to her knees on the stone, and Varek Ironfang had not even flinched. Now her wolf lay silent inside her, not dead but wounded so deep she had gone somewhere Adaline could not reach. She had no pack, no money, no family left. Her mother had died 2 winters before, believing to her last breath that her daughter would one day stand beside the Alpha King. I'm sorry, Mama. I believed it too. Adaline pressed her hand to the one thing she still had, a small brass thimble, worn smooth with years, hanging on a cord beneath her gown. It had been her mother's. Her mother had mended the ceremonial robes of that very pack for 20 years, stitching silver thread into other women's gowns, and had told her daughter, again and again, you'll rise, my girl. One day you'll wear the silver, not so it. Adaline had worn it tonight. The silver, and the thimble both. She closed her fist around the thimble and watched her breath disappear into the dark. Footsteps. A figure emerged from the shadows of the colonnade, tall, dark-haired, moving with the fluid grace of a predator who did not need to announce himself. He wore no ceremonial robes, only black, and an expression that gave away nothing. Adaline's wolf stirred weakly. Alpha. Not Varek. Someone else. He stopped 3 steps below her, studying her with eyes the color of a winter storm, pale gray, almost silver, unreadable. You're the rejected one, he said. Not a question. And you're trespassing on Northern Reachland, she managed, her voice raw. The border is 2 miles east. I know exactly where I am. He climbed the steps until he stood before her, and then, slowly, he removed his coat and draped it over her trembling shoulders. My name is Dorian Rourke. And I have a proposition for you. Adaline looked up at the Alpha of Ashfell, Varek Ironfang's oldest rival, the one wolf he had spent a decade trying to destroy. She did not know, in that moment, whether fate was saving her, or damning her a second time in a single night. Remember his coat around her shoulders. It was the first warm thing anyone had given her in a very long time. Why? She asked, her teeth chattering. Because you'll freeze to death in about 40 minutes, and I didn't ride 3 hours through the rain to watch that happen. Something flickered in the storm-gray eyes. I came because I heard the Alpha King was rejecting his fated mate tonight. I wanted to see what kind of woman could make Varek Ironfang foolish enough to sever a sacred bond. I'm not anything. That's why he rejected me. No. Dorian crouched until they were eye to eye. He rejected you because you frightened him. A mate bond is the one thing an alpha cannot control. His wolf would have put you before his empire, before his power, and Varek has never allowed anything to threaten his control. He extended a scarred hand. Your wolf is dying, Adaline. The rejection took more than the bond. If you try to survive out here alone, you'll be gone before the next moon. Come with me. Let me give you what he was too weak to offer. Which is a reason to live long enough to make him regret this night for the rest of his life. Behind her, the doors of the hall opened, spilling light and music and laughter into the dark. The Alpha King had already moved on to entertaining his guests, no doubt accepting congratulations on his wisdom. Something cracked inside Adaline. Not her heart, that was already shattered. Something harder. Some part of her that had always believed the world would be fair if she only endured enough. She took Dorian Rourke's hand. Ashfell Keep rose from the mist like something carved out of the mountain itself, black granite, ancient walls scarred by centuries of battle, standing stronger than anything Adaline had ever seen. Where the northern reach had golden spires and sunlit halls, this was a fortress. Varek had once mocked it as primitive. Now it only looked like safety. She woke in an enormous bed after 2 days of fever, her wolf barely clinging to life, and found Dorian in a chair by the window, watching her. Why did you save me? She asked, when she could speak. Because Varek Ironfang took something from me 8 years ago, he said quietly, and called it collateral damage. I have been waiting a long time for the right way to answer that. And then he handed me one. He paused. But I'll tell you plainly, so there are no lies between us. I didn't come for you. I came for a weapon. You spent 3 weeks bonded to him. You've seen his private chambers, heard his counsel, watched his weaknesses. You know things about the Alpha King no spy could ever learn. You want a spy. I want justice. He leaned forward. Varek threw you away because you threatened his control. Imagine becoming something he cannot dismiss. Cannot destroy. Imagine walking into the Solstice Summit in 3 months' time, standing beside me, as the Luna of Ash fell, while every ruling wolf in 5 territories watches. Untouchable. Unbroken. And let him see exactly what he threw away. The room seemed to tilt. You don't love me. No. And you don't love me. This isn't about romance, Adaline. It's about survival, and it's about the truth. I'll give you power and protection. You help me take apart the empire he built on lies. That's the arrangement. She thought of Varek's face. Asterisk liability. Weak. A mistake asterisk she thought of her mother, dead and grateful, who had scrubbed his floors and stitched his robes and believed her daughter would rise. If I do this, she said slowly, though she could barely sit up, I want your word that I'm a partner. Not a puppet. I have a voice. I'm not just bait. Something like surprise crossed Dorian's face. You're negotiating terms while you can hardly lift your head. Those are my terms. He studied her a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a small, sharp-edged, genuine thing. Agreed. Partner, not puppet. He extended his hand. Then we have a bargain, Luna. She took it. She had been thrown out into the cold. Now she was being offered a chance to stand back up. She only hoped she had chosen the right fire. They gave her 12 weeks, and Adaline used every hour of them. The servants of Ashfell did not bow with fearful eyes the way they had in the Northern Reach. They met her gaze directly, curious, assessing. A sharp-eyed, iron-haired beta named Bryn oversaw her training, combat, pack law, the tangled politics of 5 territories. The Alpha doesn't make careless choices, Bryn told her, low, the first day. If he brought you here, he believes you can do this. Don't prove him wrong. So she didn't. She rose before dawn. She trained until her body ached and then trained more. She read until the words blurred. And slowly, 1 page, 1 bruise, 1 lesson at a time, the hollow-cheeked, half-dead woman who had arrived on a borrowed horse began to disappear, and someone else began to stand in her place. 3 weeks in, her wolf spoke for the first time since the rejection. He's watching us. Dorian was there at the edge of the training yard, arms crossed, saying nothing. He was there most days, never praising, never interfering, only watching. That night at dinner, at opposite ends of a table built for 20, she finally asked him why he hated Varek so much. His fork paused. Her name was Adaline, he said. My younger sister. She was gentle. Too gentle for a world of wolves and territory wars. But she had a gift, she could sense a bond before it formed. Knew when 2 wolves were fated before they ever met. His jaw tightened. Varek wanted that gift. Wanted to use her to arrange matings across his territory, to breed alliances. When she refused to become his tool, he arranged a hunting accident. They said a rogue killed her. But rogues don't carry Northern Reach steel. His hands closed on the table. I held her while she died. She was 19. Adaline thought of her own mother, the quiet woman who had scrubbed floors and stitched silver thread and believed in fate's goodness to the very end. I'm sorry, she whispered. I understand wanting someone to answer for it. My mother died believing I'd stand beside the Alpha King one day. She worked herself into the ground in his servants' quarters, grateful for the honor. And he rejected me in front of the same wolves who watched her bow and scrape for 20 years. Her voice hardened. He didn't just throw me away. He spat on everything she gave. Something shifted in Dorian's face, the wall between Alpha and Asset cracking. I thought you were only angry, he said quietly. I didn't see that you were grieving too. Anger is easier to carry. It is. But grief is what makes you fight until there's nothing left. He rose and came to her end of the long table, looking down with eyes that suddenly seemed less like winter. I've been treating you like a tool. Useful, replaceable, I was wrong. He extended his hand. LA? She took it, feeling the calluses of a wolf who had been fighting alone for 8 years. LA. The first real test came 6 weeks before the summit. A delegation arrived from the Stormridge pack, Alpha Halvard and his Luna, Ingrid, Varek's closest allies. They'll recognize me, Adaline said. That's the point, Dorian answered, sliding a parchment across the table. Stormridge poured a fortune into a silver mine Varek promised would make them rich. My sources say those mines are nearly empty, and the returns he's been reporting are invented. He's been stealing from his own allies for years. What I don't have is someone who was inside his house, who can speak to what she saw with her own eyes. At dinner the next night, in a gown of midnight blue, Adaline sat calm and clear-voiced while Alpha Halvard, a barrel-chested wolf with suspicious eyes, called her Varek's discarded scraps. I prefer Survivor to scraps, she said, and the whole table went quiet. I survived being bonded to Varek Ironfang. I survived learning how he truly operates. And I survived being thrown away the moment I asked too many questions about numbers that didn't add up. Investments with impossible returns. Pack funds that vanished into mines that only ever existed on paper. Ingrid's eyes sharpened. What kind of mines? Silver ore, mostly. That never materialized. Adaline lifted her glass, perfectly composed. I'm only telling you what I saw during my 3 weeks inside his walls. What you do with it is entirely your own choice. By breakfast, Halvard had demanded copies of Dorian's documentation and was openly questioning his alliance with the Northern Reach. One crack, Dorian said, finding her in the library that night, his hand brushing her shoulder, brief, warm. The first of many. You did well, Luna. For the first time, the title did not feel like a costume. The Solstice Summit was held at Moonvein Hall, on neutral ground between the 5 great domains. Adaline had once dreamed of attending it as Varek's mate. Now she would enter it as his enemy's Luna. We arrived together, Dorian murmured as their carriage neared the glittering hall. We're gracious, but reserved. We observe. And when Varek sees you, let him see. Let him understand what standing beside me means. His hand covered hers. His wolf will know before his mind does. The bond is severed, but the memory of it lives in you both. Which brings us back to where we began. The herald's announcement. 300 wolves turning. The whispers. And Varek Ironfang, surrounded by his allies with a beautiful stranger on his arm, going utterly still as the woman he had discarded descended the staircase like a queen, and then his wolf tearing loose with a snarl that stopped the music, and that single unhinged word ringing off the walls. Mine. His bones cracked. His form shimmered between man and beast. Wolf stumbled back in alarm. Dorian stepped in front of Adaline, his own wolf rising to meet the challenge. But Adaline stepped around him, and faced Varek herself. No, she said, and her voice carried through the stunned silence to every corner of the hall. I was yours. And you rejected me in front of 300 wolves. You called me weak. Disposable. A mistake of fate that needed correcting. She lifted her chin, and the thimble at her throat caught the candlelight. I'm not yours anymore, Varek. I belong to myself. His wolf held rage, and loss, and something that might have been regret. But it was far, far too late for regret. The summit went on, but the air had changed. Halvard of Stormridge was not the only alpha now demanding an audit of what he'd invested with the Northern Reach. 3 more had joined him by dawn. Varek Ironfang stood at the center of a room that was, wolf by wolf, turning away from him. And he could not stop watching Adaline. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt hunted. He's planning something, she told Dorian that night. I saw him with his beta after his wolf broke loose. They kept looking at me. You're protected here. Not everyone I love is here. Adaline went cold as the thought took shape. My Aunt Winnie. My mother's sister. She's human, no wolf blood, no pack, no protection. She took me in after my mother died. If Varek wants to hurt me, that's where he'll reach. Dorian was already moving for the door, but a knock stopped him. Bryn entered, her face grave, and held out a sealed letter bearing the Northern Reach sigil. Dorian read it. His expression turned to ice. Wordlessly, he handed it to Adaline. Asterisk to the false Luna of Ashfell, your aunt sends her regards from my guest quarters. Her comfort depends entirely on your cooperation. You stole from my house and spread lies that have cost me allies. This ends now. Present yourself at the Northern Reach by tomorrow's moonrise, alone, and confess before witnesses that your accusations were the fabrications of a rejected woman's spite. Do this, and she is released unharmed. Refuse, and I will send her back to you in pieces. Varek Ironfang, Alpha King *. Adaline's legs gave out. Dorian caught her before she hit the floor. I have to go, she gasped. I have to. You're not going anywhere. That's exactly what he wants. He gripped her shoulders. The moment you walk into the Northern Reach alone, you'll never walk out. Winnie will be rescued, but not by sacrificing you. Listen to me. Varek is desperate. Desperate wolves make mistakes. We use this. How? Winnie doesn't have time. Then we move fast. I have scouts who've been mapping his territory for years, while he sat waiting for you to surrender. We take your aunt back. And if we do it right, Adaline, he won't just lose his allies. He'll lose everything. Because kidnapping a human civilian to blackmail a Luna is the one crime not even his allies can forgive. His thumbs brushed the tears from her face. I can't promise it won't fail. But I promise I will burn the Northern Reach to the ground before I let him take you. And I promise your aunt matters to me, because she matters to you. Adaline stared at this wolf who had begun as cold strategy and had somehow become something else. Why, she whispered. Why do you care this much? Dorian was quiet a long moment. Because somewhere between the bargain and now, he said softly, this stopped being about revenge. The rescue party left at midnight, and Adaline stood on the tower balcony watching them vanish into the dark, her heart torn between hope and terror. When did this become real for you? She asked, when Dorian came to stand beside her. He didn't pretend not to understand. The night you negotiated terms from a sickbed. You could barely sit up, and you demanded to be a partner, not a puppet. A ghost of a smile. I realized then you were never going to be easy to control. And I found I didn't want to. He turned to face her fully. I told myself I wanted a weapon. But weapons don't argue with you during strategy. They don't challenge everything you believed for 10 years. They don't make your wolf pace the floor every time they leave the room. Dorian. I'm not good at this. Alolan used to say I had all the warmth of a glacier. His voice roughened. But glaciers can crack. You cracked me, Adaline. Somewhere along the way I stopped seeing an advantage and started seeing you. I was rejected, she whispered. Thrown away. Called weak and disposable by a fool who couldn't see what he had. What if I'm broken? You're not broken. His hand cradled her cheek, warm and steady. You're scarred. There's a difference. Scars mean you survived. And you didn't only survive, you rose. She was crying now. I'm terrified of believing this is real. Of waking up tomorrow and finding it was just another performance. Then let me prove it isn't. He kissed her, not the cool, ceremonial touch they had shown the world at their Luna announcement, but something real, and tender, and achingly honest. When they finally drew apart, she was trembling. That wasn't strategy, he said. No, she whispered. It wasn't. Dawn brought word that made her knees buckle with relief. Winnie was safe. Dorian's wolves had taken her from her cell an hour before, and she was on her way to Ash Fell. And they had brought back more than an old woman, Varek's own guards had talked. There were letters in his hand. Names. Dates. Orders. Enough, Dorian said, to end him in front of every alpha at the summit. The final assembly was held in Moonbane's great amphitheater, tier upon tier of ruling wolves from 5 territories. Adaline stood beside Dorian at the petitioner's floor in a gown of deep crimson, the color of challenge, of blood, of wolves who refused to kneel. Honored alphas and lunas of the 5 territories, Dorian began, his voice carrying to the highest tier. I come before you not to speak of borders or trade, but to expose a threat to us all. 2 nights ago, Alpha Varek Ironfang kidnapped a human civilian, an elderly woman with no pack, no wolf blood, no value to anyone, for one purpose, to force my Luna to surrender herself to his control. Gasps rolled through the chamber. Varek shot to his feet. That's a lie. You would, and you did. Dorian lifted a leather satchel. Letters in your own hand. Testimony from your own guards. And the woman herself, recovering under my roof, ready to confirm every word. The ancient arbiter, Elder Bramwell, raised a hand. Serious accusations, Alpha Rourke. Alpha Ironfang, what say you? I say it's a fabrication, Varek snarled. A conspiracy between my enemy and a rejected maid I discarded for good reason. She's unstable. Delusional. She's been spreading lies about my dealings since she attached herself to Ashfell like a parasite. Am I? Adaline stepped forward, and the chamber fell silent as she walked to its center where all eyes could see her. You called me weak, Varek. Disposable. A mistake of fate that needed correcting. You rejected me in front of 300 wolves because I threatened your control. She held his gaze. So tell me, why did you panic the moment you saw me alive? She turned to the assembly. 3 weeks as his bonded mate was all I needed to see the cracks in his empire. Investments that existed only on paper. Returns that defied arithmetic. Pack funds funneled into mines that were never dug. She looked to the Stormridge Alpha. Alpha Halvard. You audited your investment 3 days ago. What did you find? Halvard's jaw tightened. 70% of the reported returns were invented. The mines are nearly empty. My pack has been deceived for 5 years. The chamber erupted. And when the noise reached its peak, a new figure appeared at the entrance, Bryn, supporting a frail, silver-haired human woman with fierce, familiar eyes. Aunt Winnie, Adaline breathed. Winnie walked slowly to the center of that vast ring of wolves, one small human surrounded by hundreds, and her voice, when it came, was steady as iron. 2 nights ago, men wearing the Northern Reach sigil dragged me from my home, put a sack over my head, and threw me in a cell. A wolf with gold in his eyes came to see me. She raised one thin hand and pointed directly at Varek Ironfang. That one. He told me my niece needed to learn her place, and that I was to be the lesson. She's human, Varek said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Humans lie. Enough. Elder Bramwell's voice cracked like thunder. The evidence before this assembly speaks of crimes against pack law, against the innocent, and against the sacred bonds that hold our territories together. I call for an immediate vote of no confidence. He turned to the tiers. All who believe Varek Ironfang should be stripped of his title and his lands, rise. For a moment, no one moved. Then Halvard of Stormridge stood. Then Ingrith beside him. Then 3 more alphas. Then a dozen. Then 30. Chairs scraped across stone as wolf after wolf rose, allies, subjects, admirers, until more than 2/3 of the assembly stood in silent condemnation, and Varek Ironfang turned in a slow circle to find almost no one left sitting. His eyes found Adaline. "You did this," he whispered. "You destroyed everything." "No." She held his gaze without flinching. "You destroyed yourself the night you threw me away. I only made sure everyone finally saw the truth." The guards came for him. He did not resist. As they led him past her, he stopped. "Adaline. You had your chance to speak," she said, her voice quiet and cold. "You used it to call me weak." She turned her back, and did not watch him go. 6 months later, Ashfell Keep had changed. The fortress that had once been all cold granite and closed gates now hummed with life. Varek's fall had scattered his territory, and displaced wolves had come seeking a pack that would not treat them as disposable. Adaline had given them one. She called it the Moonrise Refuge, a home for rejected wolves, broken wolves, wolves who had been told all their lives that they were weak and worthless and had nowhere left to go. "You're building an army," Dorian had observed, watching her settle a trembling, hollow-eyed young wolf into warm furs. "I'm building a family," she had corrected. "There's a difference." Now she stood on the tower balcony where they had shared their first true kiss, watching snow fall over the mountains, the same mountains beyond which, in exile now, stripped of title and power, Varek Ironfang was said to have gone half-mad, howling a name in his sleep. Adaline felt nothing when she heard those stories. Not triumph. Not pity. Only the quiet stillness of a wound that had finally closed. "You're thinking too hard," Dorian said, appearing beside her and draping a fur over her shoulders. "Your face does a thing right there when you overthink." "I was thinking about my mother." She touched the brass thimble at her throat, worn smooth by 2 women's hands now. "She spent her whole life stitching silver thread into other women's gowns, telling me I'd rise. She died before she could see any of it." She smiled faintly at the snow. "But I think she'd like the refuge. All those cast-off wolves getting a second chance at being wanted. She'd have mended every one of them. She raised a daughter who does exactly that." Dorian turned her to face him, and drew a small box from his coat. Inside lay a ring of black silver, set with a moonstone that seemed to glow from within. "It was Alohan's," he said softly. "She told me once that I'd know my true mate by whether I was finally willing to give it away. I've carried it 8 years, waiting for someone worthy." He took a breath. "You were never a weapon, Adaline. Somewhere along the way you became my home. I don't want to keep choosing you as an arrangement. I want to choose you as a wolf who would choose you again in every version of this life." Tears blurred her eyes. "I spent so long believing I wasn't worth choosing. That loving me was a burden someone had to escape. Then let me spend the rest of my life proving otherwise." She threw her arms around him and said yes into his shoulder, again and again, while the snow fell around them like a blessing. She had been rejected once. Thrown away. Left on cold stone steps to die. But she had been found by a wolf who saw her worth long before she could see it herself, and together, out of grief and ashes, they had built something stronger than revenge, deeper than strategy, and more lasting than any bond that fate could forge or break. They had built a home. And that was worth every scar. Some people will look at you, and all they will see is what you cost them. Varek Ironfang had a fated mate handed to him by the moon itself, the rarest gift a wolf can receive, and he threw her onto cold stone because loving her might have made him feel too much, need too much, risk too much. He called it strength. It was the smallest kind of weakness there is, the fear of being truly seen. But here is what he never understood. The people who are thrown away are not the broken ones. Adaline was not weakened by being discarded, she was freed by it. Freed to find out who she was without someone else deciding her worth. Freed to be chosen, at last, by someone who saw all of her and did not look away. If you have ever been made to feel disposable by someone who could not recognize what they had, hear this. You were never the mistake. You were only in the wrong hands. And the right ones are still out there. If this story touched your heart tonight, tell me in the comments, have you ever been thrown away by someone who couldn't see your worth, and risen stronger than they ever imagined? I would truly love to read your story. And if you believe, as I do, that even the most rejected heart can find its way home, then follow along, because there is a new story here every week. Thank you for staying to the very end. Your presence here means more than you know.